So is AI just a chat tool or another IT tool, or is it something that's challenging how we run a company?
It is so fundamentally different and it impacts everything. AI is the engine and data is its fuel. If you don't have the brakes, you'll light a fire. It's as simple as that at this point. We don't even have the technologies to actually control this thing. Like MCP authorization is in draft. How many people are using MCPs right now? Pretty much everybody.
Everybody, and each person there's probably 50 MCP servers. Like if you're actually doing anything useful, probably connect a lot of sources. Yeah. As a founder of a startup, how do you feel about the competitive space? You're like a small fish swimming with big whales.
I think about this every single day of my life. There's a lot of companies that won't be here in a year or two. Focus on the North Star, focus on the actual goal, and fight on your own turf.
Bruno, welcome to Inflection Point, the Digital Intelligence Podcast. I am delighted to have you, and thanks for visiting us in San Diego. By the way, this is the first time we're recording in the new studio, so you're going to be doing our beta testing for us today, and hopefully all goes well and smoothly.
Wonderful! I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me, and I've always loved taking a crack at new releases of software and beta things, and so. I'm excited to try your studio.
Amazing. Okay. So I'm sure I'm going to weave in because you and I met about, I want to say maybe over a decade ago in a different context. We're both doing different things, but why don't you share a little bit more about your background and both you have such an interesting career and life journey. So I'd love to hear more about your story.
Thank you. Let me think where to start. So I'm not a native-born American. I came here as a refugee from Bosnia. I was in high school and came here actually to be an exchange student back in the early 90s. And that kind of allowed me to escape right before the war started there. And so, but I was always a software kid. I wrote code on Commodore 64 back home. I went to a computer science high school back in Sarajevo, and that basically kind of drew my career. I lived in Minnesota. My first job was to be a first engineer at a software startup for handwriting recognition technologies called Technology Solutions Incorporated, and that's where I got my bug. Startups were the thing to do, and I really never left startup land. I've been doing startups ever since. It's always been build something from scratch, see where you can take it, solve problems that are not being solved well or that have never been solved before. And I actually kind of have a penchant for the ones that have never been solved before. And so, that's kind of how my career began. Studied computer science, worked through my entire college. My parents were refugees in the Netherlands during that war. So I had a bunch of other responsibilities to deal with. Came to California in the gold rush of software, late 90s, participated in the boom, landed at a company called Webmethods. That was a formative career move for me. I was a software engineer at that time. Webmethods was breaking new ground on building, if you remember back then, XML server, B2B integration, ERP to ERP over the internet, over XML structured and all of that. It was an amazing technology, an amazing company, amazing people I worked with. I'm still in touch with many, many of them. And, I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And believe it or not, that company, the technology quarter century later is still actually a leader in its space.
Incredible.
It got acquired by IBM 2 years ago for $2.5 billion, which was still amazing to kind of watch. And from there, I went to business. I got my business degree and then shifted over to kind of product side of the work. And you and I met at a company that I founded called Sumo Logic, and that was an amazing journey for me. Learned a ton. Met a lot of great people there, met a lot of great customers, including yourself. And, we built the transformation that was happening at that time in 2010 and 2008, 9, 10 was basically cloud migration. Enterprise were migrating to the cloud. And We rode that wave. We built a cloud platform for data analytics, primarily logs, and for cybersecurity and DevOps. And there was a wild ride to kind of, move along with AWSs of the world as they were growing and scaling. We were maybe a little early because it was very early days of the cloud when we started, but it was the right timing. And then I spent about 13, 14 years there. Took a little break, and I'm here now at Bedrock Data.
Amazing. And definitely, I would say with a Sumo Logic, at least from a customer perspective, because as a customer at a few companies, a few of the companies I was running technology for, it was certainly, there's this tailwinds that when you can build and have a product and a business at a time when it's just a beautiful tailwind, and it seemed like you guys hit that one really, really well.
It wasn't without pivots. It was interesting. When we started the company, actually, same investors that I have on my shoulder here are investors in Bedrock Data, Greylock Partners. Ashim Chandna was our first investor, friend for life. It was interesting. We were going to build a cloud SIM back in 2009, 2010. But we went and started talking to cybersecurity professionals, and they were like, we're not buying a cloud SIM. We're not going to the cloud. What are you talking about? So we had a pivot after we founded the company, like when 90-degree pivot right into DevOps, because who was using the cloud then? It was the engineers. They were building, sort of experimenting with cloud applications, digital applications in the cloud. And we were like, okay, we 90-degree pivot into DevOps. And eventually we came back to cybersecurity. But that's what was needed at the time. That's the little bit of early. Yeah. It was early for a certain buyer, not for all buyers.
Yeah. And of course, Docker containers. I think in DevOps, I remember early on, the small DevOps teams were like, hey man, this Docker and Kubernetes were like the thing that was going to redefine. Some of these guys were very early, at least visionaries in terms of this is the way to run cloud workloads. So that's
absolutely.
Okay, so now you shifted into this next major tailwind. So I feel like our careers almost like the careers have these very, very specific points of, I would call that early on like client server computing, and then, hey, we can actually do stuff on the internet, which is now nobody, of course, everybody assumes like, oh, of course, all this stuff has been running forever. But like, no, there was a time where you had to take all these things that were not connected to the internet and connect them up to the internet. And now, of course, we're in the midst of this next probably major transformation and probably transition to a whole new era. How, as you were thinking about a new company, like how did you approach this current challenge and kind of reading the world and seeing what's on the horizon and also what you should be doing?
Fascinating question. I was on a different panel this week, and this similar topic came up. The way I think about these waves, I think of these waves as enterprise replatforming waves. There was the mainframe, which became a computing system. And then there was the distributed computing through client server, just like you said. Then there was the internet, and then there was the mobile smartphone. And then there was the cloud, and now there's AI. They all have their own different shifts and characteristics. AI is not a technology we're adopting. AI is a new enterprise platform. It is different than the previous transformation waves in many different characteristics, but it is nevertheless a new platform that the enterprise is going to be essentially running their business. And you can tell now, because all the boards are demanding that the companies adopt AI across all functions, internal, external, for productivity, for better outcomes, for cost reduction, all of these things. And so it's very much a top-down initiative. I kind of feel like when you look back at cloud was more of a bottom-up. It was kind of, cloud emerged to facilitate rapid development of software, sort of, it mimicked agile for hardware. AI is different. AI is top-down initiative in a lot of ways, and it's got a very different profile. It's not an infrastructure change. It's the way we do work change, right? How we use technology to do work. And it's got all kinds of not well understood risks and opportunities. And I think we are at the stage of the market where people are trying to figure out what this thing even is. and we're nowhere near. Like when I talk to prospects and customers, the spectrum of understanding is so wide. Like I'm sometimes shocked when I talk to CTOs of how little they know and sometimes how much they know. It's really wide distribution.
So this is like this is one of my favorite conversations to have, and I'm with you because I think, like many things, and there's an example I read about somewhere in the history of technology and history of science. You could look at a car, the invention of a car. You could look at a car and call it a horseless carriage, but if you only use the car as a horseless carriage, it has a bunch of limitations. And this is a little bit like almost like a philosophy of language. Our language defines what the thing is. So is AI just a chat tool? Or is it something, and you started alluding to this, is it just a chat tool or another IT tool, quote unquote, like, hey, we're just, it's going to cost me $40 per user, is just another IT tool? Or is it something that's challenging how we run a company? And is it an operating model tool, right? Or operating model transformation, right? And I know transformation is an overly used word, but it's back to this idea of like, I think we're only almost limited by our vision for what we can use with these technologies, which also goes to the less you use it, the less your vision you're going to have. You're going to be like, yeah, this is a horseless carriage, as opposed to this can completely redefine the entire way we work, the entire way we're organized as a company, the entire way we're organized, the entire culture, which is pretty dang heavy for just, this is not just like, we move some stuff to the cloud. I think the cloud did not go as deep into the nervous system of an entire corporation that impacts everybody. What's your take on that?
I mean, we could spend next 3 hours talking just about this. It is so fundamentally different and it impacts everything. Like you said, it permeates. Like cloud impacted technologists, and that was pretty much it. It impacted how we architect applications. This impacts every aspect. And if you think about it as a chat tool and use it to like fine tune a paragraph of something you're writing, I mean, great. It does a good job. Like to me, and I say this to my coworkers, it's like an external brain. When you kind of look at statistics of how people do work, let's just start with basic things like meetings, productivity of meetings, collaboration, responding to texts and messages and Slacks and emails and whatnot. Like at Bedrock Data, we are doubling down on use of AI, and I can tell you, you should talk to my CISO, George Gerchow. He'd be a great person to chat with here as well. We automate everything. Like this is an automation engine. Like I no longer read emails directly. I don't respond and read Slack directly. These tools work on my behalf when I'm asleep, and they summarize things and they tell me what I need to worry about. They tell me what I've done before so that I can do it shorter and better. Now it is, we are using it as our messaging positioning canon. It runs on like a lot of the things are done. And if you think about it, it impacts everything. Like obviously our engineers are writing a small portion of the code themselves, right? Mm-hmm. They're orchestrating all of this stuff. Everything is going to change. And we're not even like, we're maybe at, 10, 20 yard line. I'm not big into football, but we're early.
Early.
We're early. Yes. We're not close to the goalpost. We're like way at the beginning, and it's going to change dramatically.
Yeah, I think these conversations still come up of like, well, what's the ROI? Like, and when I hear the question, what's the ROI? It's kind of like my mental model. Again, we all use the language I've chosen, and why I call this the digital inflection point, the digital intelligence. It's like, what's the ROI on having unlimited intelligence in any company? All right, like if you think about it, human intelligence, okay, which AI has been built and trained on human intelligence, is this concept of, well, could your company use more intelligence? Could it use more intelligence in marketing? Could it use more intelligence in go-to-market strategy? Could it use more intelligence and fill in the blanks? So it's kind of like, what's the ROI on that? I guess if there's no interest, if your company has enough intelligence and there's no need for more intelligence, then the ROI is negative. You're going to just burn cash.
Yep.
However, if you're like, no, we need more intelligence to help us move faster, competitive, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes back to like, how do we think about these technologies? And I'm almost disappointed to hear this ROI conversation, because it just seems like we're not giving the time. And of course, like any technology, it's kind of bumpy initially, right? You need to train people. So it's going to feel like you're spending a lot more money and you're being wasteful until you start seeing the real benefits. But again, how do you navigate that? You're seeing the bill if you're using this much.
Yeah.
I mean, AI is also not cheap, right? Like, I think that the good old days of subsidies are probably going to come to an end sooner rather than later. So AI does cost money.
It does cost money, but it's dirt cheap. Honestly, like the outputs and the outcomes, the time savings that I personally get, the ROI, in my opinion, is huge. But I don't think about it as ROI. Fundamentally, like the way I think about AI for the enterprise, just zooming out from sort of individual usage, right? I think that AI is the engine and data is its fuel. And basically, the way I think about what is AI good for? It's good at sort of bringing external knowledge that it's been trained on, context of what it knows by reading the entire human output. It's good at understanding and summarizing, and it's good at generating sort of relevant information. Enterprise's proprietary data is its competitive advantage. And so the imperative for the enterprise right now is not how do I protect my data from AI because it's got risk. It is actually the opposite. It is how do I unleash AI on my proprietary data so that it can produce business outcomes for me. Decision-making, predictions, understanding of state and customer and whatever. So it's basically autonomous BI intelligence engine. And if you don't give it the right data, you won't produce the right outcomes. And that's the opportunity. That is what needs to happen. And that's why the tension between the innovation side of the house, the board, and the governance and cybersecurity side of the house, because they see that you can, like if AI is the engine and data is its fuel, when you combine like spark plugs and fuel in an uncontrolled environment, it's going to explode. So how do you do this safely is the question. How do you unleash your AI on your proprietary data that will give you competitive advantage, but don't blow it up while you're doing it? That's kind of like what people are struggling right now with, is how do we do this in a safe way, and how do we accelerate innovation? I think actually security and governance people can become major enablers of their companies moving forward better than without the guardrails.
Yeah, but that's the opportunity ahead. I've been talking a lot about this word empathy, because I think at a time when there is a lot of tension in the room, right? Because as soon as the innovation teams, whatever lately is the kind of any AI team, small ragtag team is like the innovation team, and they're tasked to like go figure out how to make us more competitive, how to make us better, how do you apply the AI in the context of our company, and then you have the other team, which they also have the responsibility and the duty to protect the company and make sure there's no data exfiltration or some accidental thing that's going to embarrass us and take us all the way back. And it seems to me like both keeping those two things going in a healthy clip, and back to the opportunity is not to just say, hey, this is not secure, look how bad these agents are, this thing hallucinates, we can't allow this in our company. And again, I think that conversation is probably declining, but how does a security team say, hell yeah, we want to help, we want to be part of the story that we're going to help our company grow and be more competitive, all those things, as opposed to we're just a set of brakes, we're applying brakes everywhere we go. And again, empathy is like, I understand the pain and obviously the responsibility, because if there's a problem, the first person they're going to call is the CISO, and they're going to say, hey, why the hell did you not protect us from ourselves? Even though at the same time, they're telling everybody go fast. And that's where I feel this is the tough part of the conversation is, how do you accelerate the innovation, but also how do you do that safely? And maybe you guys have something to do with how to support there.
Thank you for describing our business in a way. Actually, I think this word brakes, I think a lot of people have negative connotation with brakes. But, if you like cars, you know that you need good brakes to go fast, right? That's kind of the safety system that allows you to actually accelerate towards a turn and then brake late and still make good time. And so breaks are actually essential in enablement of rapid innovation, rapid movement. And so the tricky part is there's always going to be this tension. Let's talk about risk a little bit. Like, what's the risk here? The problem, the difference between AI and cloud, the similar things is that when cloud came along and when AI came along, the risk patterns shifted. We went from thick perimeters on-prem to shared responsibility security in the cloud, because the adversary could be on a virtual machine right next to you. In AI, same thing. Things are changing. AI is expanding the risk surface. There are new things. But what's different about them is that the way I think about AI is like a toddler moving at machine speed with no judgment that aims to please. And AI is basically a machine speed, non-deterministic machine, right? System that is operating in your environment, and the risk that it creates, not to even talk about the external risk, with all these vulnerability discoveries and Mythos class attacks and all this stuff, and automation that is now available to every attacker, and the skill set that it elevates for all sort of unskilled adversaries, all that stuff, right? All that stuff is still like there on the inside. When you operate on an environment in large enterprise with complex data architecture, complex infrastructure, and you unleash AI agents that you don't know what they're going to do because they're non-deterministic. That's the aspect that's novel about them. Then how do you minimize that risk? How do you understand whether they're going to inadvertently, through trying to please, perform an action that's going to expose data, provide data to where it shouldn't be, access sensitive data, violate a regulatory rule, whatever. That's why there's a tension now, because we don't have a very well understood. We don't even have the technologies to actually control these things. Like MCP authorization is in draft, right? And how many people are using MCPs right now? Pretty much everybody.
Everybody, and each person there's probably 50 MCP servers. Like if you're actually doing anything useful,
exactly,
you probably connect to a lot of sources.
Yeah. So I think the risk is very different, and the tension is needed. The brakes are needed. Because if you don't have the brakes, you'll light a fire. It's as simple as that at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe double click into. It was one thing when we had ChatGPT. It was a window, a chat box. You type something in, some input in, input out. Wonderful. At least that was contained. When you get into an agentic world, and I'd love to get your description, or at least how you see the agentic world. Now we're talking about still a piece of software, some kind of loop connected to a large language model that has some memory, that has some context, and now can call tools. So all of a sudden, you've given that baby, and I would say it's Einstein baby, right? Like the baby's got Einstein DNA, right? So like it's not that, it's intelligent. And all of a sudden it's like, here's these 15 tool calls. You now have, I'm going to give you the responsibility and the judgment when to call these tools based on the input you're getting. So all of a sudden, like this is probably in my mind, like the biggest, what's new about all the stuff. Like when sometimes like, well, there's nothing new under the sun. I'm like, well, that little thing is the only thing that's new under the sun, which is now you're trusting this little piece of software, like service accounts before. A machine worked under a service account. It didn't really change much. Like a service account did not wake up one day and say, I'm going to go do something different. It's like, no, it kind of stayed within very tight boundaries. Well, you give a LLM access to some memory, some context, some inputs, and some tool calling. So that is probably the area where I think you get into this agentic world, and like you got to think about that a little bit differently than it just normal software. It's obviously probabilistic versus deterministic, as you kind of alluded to.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. And I think it's actually that aspect of the difference between traditional software service accounts and agentic access to infrastructure is the whole probabilistic or non-deterministic is like it gets to choose which tools to open. It thinks about I need to perform this task. There are all these tools available. I'm going to go and access these tools. Say one of those tools was you must access this tool to make sure that what you're doing is in policy. It could choose not to. It chooses what it accesses. There is no way to force it. And fundamental issue with agents, if you think about them, right, there are three aspects. There's an aspect of what is the sea of possibility of what it can do through the tools. It's sort of on the design side, input side. It can access these data sets. It's got these guardrails, and that's the sort of scope of outputs that it could produce. Everything it can access could end up in the output. Then there's the runtime aspect. It is, what is it doing? Can you somehow control or influence what it's doing so that it is operating, within the boundaries of what the requester is supposed to have and whatnot? And then there's the output. There's the sort of whole, is it going to leak out something that it shouldn't, say something, combine things in toxic combination or whatnot? So all these three have to be addressed to actually get to a safe state, to be in a place where you can minimize the risk. I think one of the things that is very difficult, and one of the reasons why we are the company that we are building, Bedrock Data, is that if you think back, it all rests on data, because this is an intelligence machine that operates on data. It's going to need data to produce outcomes. The challenge with data is that data has never been really properly cataloged and inventoried and controlled in the enterprise. Data catalogs, master data management vendors try to do it. They only could do it for a sliver of data in specific data stores. Our data in the enterprise is different than infrastructure. It's very difficult to put your arms around data, right? It's fluid, it moves, it scales, it's unstructured, it grows exponentially. It's unlike sort of what a CMDB's job is like. Okay, I've got all these assets and they've got configuration properties, and if I just read those, now I know what everything is. Data is nothing like that. And that's why the cybersecurity tooling that has existed over the last 30 years, 40 years, the purpose of every cybersecurity tool, my opinion, I'll love your opinion on it, is to protect our data. There's nothing else to protect in the enterprise, right? And so, but we've been doing this by shutting doors on data, locking down networks, locking down infrastructure, locking down perimeters, locking down identities. And so we've been basically closing doors on data. Well, when you run AI, it's in the house, it's behind the door, it's not in front of the door. And so now you have to bring security to the data itself first and foremost. That means you have to know where it is, you have to know what it is, you have to know what's sensitive, you have to know who owns it, how it's being used, what's its lineage, how it's moving. Because AI no longer needs you to curate data. In the ML world of the days, right? You extract some data, you massage it, you create some features, and then ML models run. Now you unleash it on a bunch of JPEGs, and it's going to figure out what's written on those JPEGs and things like that. So we can no longer rely on that. On here, you're going to just get access to this data. We need to know what all of our data is. We need to know all the classification. We need to find it all and keep it up to date, so that when these agents are operating, at least you know what they're touching and what they're putting at risk and what they should or should not have, in their scope and whatnot. So I think this is a very complicated problem. It's forcing us. AI didn't break data security. It's just exposed what doesn't work. And so we are now trying to go back. All of this DSPM initiatives, data cataloging, data classification initiatives are largely being driven by the fact that we know we must do that before AI is unleashed. And so that's why DSPM is growing quickly and all that stuff.
I think up until this AI stuff, I think we've given up for a while on trying to manage data. And that's why you're back to, let me just put some boundaries around it, because it's too dang hard to try to actually do anything without the right tools. Of course, now using AI to help us classify and help us understand has opened up the possibility again. For a while, I think CMDB was sometimes you do it, there's an initiative, it's an effort, the data gets stale, it's too hard, that somebody leaves, so these things in the real world, in the real enterprise, these things are extremely difficult to keep alive. And I think it seems to me this whole agentic world now, if you are trying to use agents to do something useful in your company, it sounds like now you have to do something more than just, or you're not either going to give it access and be freaked out, or you need to have some kind of governance layer that you're going to give it access and you feel confident that you're not doing something that's negligent. Because I think the other element is, What happens when you start having agents doing, creating data breaches and data exfiltration? To what degree are corporations going to be looked at as like, what are the controls that you're putting in to protect from this? I think this is still, we're waiting to see what's going to happen there in terms of the companies that maybe have too much risk appetite and don't put in the right controls. And then something, God forbid, something crazy happens. What is that going to look like is probably the stuff we're still waiting to see unfold.
Governance and data security and general cybersecurity needs to move to machine speed defense. If machine speed is on the offense and the risk is at machine speed now internally with agents accessing data on their own autonomously, governance, security also have to be at machine speed, meaning we have to use AI to essentially control AI. There's no other option, right? Human-based processes and technologies won't work, right? And you're exactly right. We did give up, right? We gave up. We tried for a long time. There are many companies that attempted to solve this data problem before, and it's never really worked out. Largely because of the properties of data that I talked about earlier. It's like, you can't use a regular expression to figure out that this is a offer letter. That just doesn't work, right? To understand data because of its unstructured nature, you have to have a brain. Guess what? Now we have a brain, right? We have scale, we have a brain. The challenge right now is how to do that right. And that's just kind of where we are innovating is tokens are probably 3-4 orders of magnitude too expensive to classify all the data. At multi-petabyte scale, running a petabyte through an LLM and trying to classify everything costs in millions, like millions of dollars, right? So the innovation needs to be on how do you intelligently use small language models? How do you create memory about what you understand well and do this in a very optimized way to be able to keep up with the volume of data. And number two, not burn the bank by trying to do this, right? So a ton of innovation is required to actually get it done. But at least now we have a prayer and a hope that we can get it done. And actually that's where we are innovating and working on these multi like double-digit petabyte, triple-digit petabyte environments.
So maybe I'm really curious about this. So let's maybe double-click a little bit more into large language models, because this is also helpful to others who are listening to this. You probably don't want to throw everything. I'm just generically speaking here. You probably don't want to throw everything at Opus 4.7, right? That's like shooting a fly with an elephant rifle. Yeah. So talk a little bit more about, open source models versus these frontier models, expensive models, versus maybe like a Kimi or a Quinn. These Chinese models are darn good, especially they're open source. You can run them somewhere else. So how do you guys think about that? How do you guys think about the choosing the models, and where do you run these things locally so they're fast? And like, I'd love to hear your kind of the choices, the selections, and what makes sense without sharing any of your proprietary or secret sauce data. But I'd love to hear how you guys are thinking about that now.
The game is scale without cost compromise. That's the game, because people who have this problem are generally larger enterprises with regulated data sets, with sprawling infrastructure. And they're also the ones who are driving AI into the business. And so the whole combination of the need and the problem exists more at that scale.
And high complexity probably.
Correct. Exactly.
High complexity environments.
Exactly. And so, so the scale without cost compromise and precision is what's required. And to do that, some serious architecture needs to be deployed, right? Nobody's writing on-prem software anymore. And so let's think about the first problem. First problem is you have enterprise data, it's proprietary. You want it secured and classified. Well, how do you do that? Do you allow me to read it from the outside, where I can run a pretty efficient in my backend model, and incur a third-party risk? Or do you force me to run inside of your environment? And how do I do that without writing on-prem software that you host yourself, right? So there are a bunch of challenges architecturally that exist. We've sort of, quote unquote, invented the federated AI approach that allows us to actually run models on the customer side and data never moves, but still have a big model on our side assist in that workflow, such that the customer gets the benefit but doesn't incur any more risk. We do that by actually being very strategic about what type of models and where do we run them and what size models and all of that. So we run the gamut, right? Without kind of going into too much of a level of detail, we use and tune small language models that are, you don't require an opus to classify data. It's exactly like you said. It's got so much capability that is wasted on what we need to do. So we tune and train small language models. And they're actually different when you're looking at structured data versus unstructured data. You actually have different requirements there, and different models perform better and all of that. And then on the back end, we train more sophisticated, we fine-tune more sophisticated models on our back end that help assist the small language models. And so we run a distributed AI approach so that data never has to move, so that we can run the models near the data without requirement of GPUs. But we run on our back end bigger stuff, bigger guns that can sort of assist when needed in a way that does not ever need to exfiltrate any data. So architecture is really evolved in order for the needs of a large, sophisticated, regulated enterprise that would never be okay with exfiltrating data, but requires high precision, high scale architecture to deliver the value, right? So it's, we in terms of the sort of the open source and Chinese models and things like that, we don't touch them. We don't touch Chinese models at this stage, because even if you believe that they're fine security-wise and safety-wise, they won't be malicious in some way or manipulated or whatever, we just don't want our customers to have to think about it. Right now, there's sufficient open source technologies and in-house built technologies and models that are not kind of thought about in that way, that we just don't need to.
I see.
Right now, where what we deliver, we can deliver with everything that's sort of built on this side, right? Yeah. And that our customers don't worry about as much as they would for some of the foreign models.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And I just want to come back to one thing. When you're talking about on-prem, right? On-prem just means it's in the customer's environment. Correct. Doesn't necessarily mean on-prem could be Correct. Azure.
That's right.
It could be Databricks. It could be whatever else. It's not like, it's in their cloud environment, whatever that environment looks like.
That's right.
And the whole idea is like, nobody's going to want to send their data outside. Like that's.
And they also don't want to run complex software systems in their environment. Mm-hmm. Like that's why they went to the cloud, right? They don't want to run third-party software. They buy SaaS. Right? And so how do you thread that needle? Operate in their environment but not incur the risk. Like at Sumo, data came to us. So they incurred the third-party risk. That's why we had to have all these PCI certifications and whatnot. In this world, nobody will give us their proprietary data. That's way higher risk to exfiltrate that data. And so, the architecture we actually developed is unique because it does not, we actually, even though deploy models to run on that side, there's no persistent software. Right? So the customer never has to manage Kubernetes clusters, appliance, or anything. It's all serverless. It's very, very high, sort of low touch, basically a CloudFormation template or a Terraform template, and that's it. Mm-hmm. But, a lot of engineering had to go into how that engine operates without really any real persistence.
Mm-hmm. The last time we met before you started Bedrock, I was working on an Agentic company. I was trying to build these AI agents and DevOps. And like my vision 2 years ago was, all this stuff is happening now at scale. But the idea of like this notion, back to my vision was this idea of like digital teammates, that can join a call, that can listen to the meeting, that can connect to Jira, that can do all that stuff. And what I learned firsthand, and it sounds like kind of funny, but what I learned firsthand is how competitive the space is. Okay, like there's no, like sometimes like, oh, look at this company, Google bought it for $32 billion. It's like as if like this thing just easy and it just happens. It is such a fiercely competitive marketplace in high tech and in the AI high tech world. So as a founder of a startup, how do you feel about the competitive space? You're like a small fish swimming with big whales, and other small fish. So maybe shifting the conversation to, as a founder, trying to build something that's fairly transformative, and there's a lot of companies salivating, both, again, big incumbents, small incumbents. How do you kind of manage that? How do you manage the team? How much? I was talking to another founder a few sessions ago, a few podcasts ago, about, to what degree, how much are you paranoid? How much do you focus on what you're doing versus what others are doing? Love to get your philosophy on just how you're leading a startup through this time, knowing how, I'm assuming you agree that you're living in swimming in a very competitive ocean.
It's a fascinating question. I think about this every single day of my life. And in fact, I talk to my team about this, every day of my life. Market is competitive. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot of wrappers on LLMs. There's a lot of companies that won't be here in a year or two. The question is, what's your real focus? What is the problem you're solving? And can you solve it in a differentiated way? I think, to touch on the sort of digital teammate, that was the first thrust of all of the AI startups and companies. Like, I know dozens of companies that do that, right? There's a lot of, SOC, autonomous SOC agent and agent for this and agent for HR and all this stuff. And so there's a lot of custom stuff. That's getting eroded. Just the companies like Anthropic themselves are like, wiping
every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, like 100 companies gone.
Exactly. And so for me, and it's always been like this for me, like I've never been very focused on competitors. It's good to know what competitors are doing. I've always been focused on the customer and the problem. And the way that we think about this is, if I think about like, what is the hard problem? What's the unique place where it's going to be like, the need for heavy duty engineering and architecture has not gone away. Like AI, no AI. You could have a bunch of coding assistants. The difficult problems are still difficult to solve. And there will be few companies that will solve the full problem, not many companies. And our sort of grounding bedrock, not to like, double entendre here, but it literally why company is called is bedrock. We're built on data. Data is the hard problem. Architecture to scale, to understand, to do it inexpensively, to do it precisely. That's the hard part, right? You cannot engineer this with vibe coding, right? And so for us, when people get distracted at my company and think, oh, let's go chase this AI little use case or that AI, I'm like, if it is not anchored in us deeply understanding data better than anybody else in the business, we're not doing it. Because that's where the noise is. That's where a bunch of like overlaps are going to be. I don't want to go fight with companies at their own turf. I want them to come and fight on our turf. And I do believe that we are solving an important problem. I think actually that if you think about the enterprise replatforming on AI and you believe that data is the fuel for AI, if we don't get the data right, you can't have an AI strategy without data strategy. If you don't get the data right, we won't get AI right either. And I think ultimately this is all about building something that enterprises have never had, which is a data context that's ubiquitously available, that is up to date, that covers all of your enterprise data assets, that understands them in depth, and then feeds that to every downstream process that touches data, right? And so we actually tell our customers, and I tell this to my team, we are not building a new pane of glass. We're building a new source of truth so that everything downstream gets better and smarter. Your SIM now knows that a principal that it's detecting in one of its MITRE attack rules has a high blast radius to access to sensitive data. It now knows that the piece of infrastructure that's involved in an alert houses sensitive data. Your CNAP now knows when it detects there is a vulnerability in your cloud that there is high value sensitive data on that particular piece of infrastructure versus not on the other one. So it can prioritize better. So that's the way to think. That's the way how we think. We basically want to enable the enterprise to understand its data so it can do all these things. Like DSPM is an artifact because when you have this understanding, you can solve DSPM. When you have this understanding, you can govern AI. When you have this understanding, you can enrich your SOC. And so we anchor everything in the thing that we know is hard, that we know we have an advantage on. So that's the continuous conversation. Focus on the North Star, focus on the actual goal, and, fight on your own turf.
Amazing, brilliant. I think that's a really, really good founder advice, both on the focus side and also just on this question is, are you solving a problem that's hard enough, like a challenging, difficult problem? Because if it requires just an MCP and vibe coding over the weekend, you may want to do something else.
Yeah, Mike Spicer, just to make Mike Spicer, Series B investor, into Sumo Logic. I was an EIR at Sarah Hill Ventures. Amazing guy, amazing company. Built amazing companies. He built Snowflake Computing, Pure Storage, and all these. Actually talks about we choose problems to solve that are technically difficult. We will take on technology risk. We will find the best people, solve the hardest problems. That's what's going to be the moat, right? So like he tells this philosophically, and I really love that. I learned that from him, and I think that's a philosophy also that matters, right? You solve the hard problems, you work hard, you get the right team, and you stay focused, and it pans out. Hopefully, if you execute.
One of the things that you highlighted on, and maybe I want to just drag it back into the conversation, is when you talk about data, you can't really have an AI strategy without data, it's an important lesson that I think a lot of companies forget. And the way the reason why it's a little bit, it's easy to launch a proof of concept or a pilot. Let's just call it, it's easier to launch an AI pilot because everything is controlled in a pilot. The inputs are controlled, the access to the data is controlled, and everything. And what I found is that when the pilots fail and they crash, they fail and crash because you thought this limited understanding of the data, access layer, and everything was optimized for that pilot. It was not optimized to run at scale because the hard problems were not addressed, right? Because you just want to, again, back to, I want to show value, I want to show a return quickly. And we continue to come back to this idea of like, if the data is not solved up front, your pilot is only going to go so far. Have you seen that kind of play out? And when are you guys engaged in a conversation with customers? Is it when something had stalled out? Or to what degree does that happen? Like they have a problem, now we got to bring you in and help us solve this problem so we can actually continue with our pilots.
We engage in different ways for different sort of buying triggers, right? We engage with people who are being proactive, deploying new technologies, trying to find a governance engine that can help them deploy rapidly, either AI or move to the cloud. Believe it or not, there are still people moving to the cloud.
That's amazing.
And then, other ones are where they have data sprawl, they're trying to sort of control that. And then sometimes it's on the bad side, like incident happened. We need to understand what got accessed, where the data was. Now we got to clean it up, all that stuff. But we get engaged in different patterns. But what is fundamentally unique here is that, we're still a small fish. Like we are a Series A funded startup. We're growing very quickly. What we actually wrote a blog about this and a white paper is how to do pilots and POVs properly. To actually not end up buying technologies that won't scale, that will fail you in the future because of that limited scope that you described. When you do a pilot or a POV and you do it on a narrow scope, everything's controlled and everything looks rosy. And then you start trying to go to production. It takes 18 months to finish the first scan. And now you're like renewing in 6 months. Should I renew? I don't know, And so we wrote specifically that in the world of data and AI, POVs and pilots should be done at a petabyte scale. They should be done on production environments because you can never tell whether this thing will, become a Gatling gun of all false positives because your production data is much more complex than your curated data that you did for a POV, or somebody gave you data and says, why don't you run on this data? That just doesn't work. And we have actually been, half of our business is displacing competitors who have failed at delivering. And typically they failed because of the pattern that you described. A small pilot, you start, try to get to scale. We just finished one, I can't say the name, finished just one where actually somebody from the company that bought from us is actually on the board of the competitor, or somebody's cousin is. They had to shut it down because it took them 6 months to not get anywhere after the POV. And so it's very hard. I think companies need to actually really think about this so they don't have to restart. Like, you don't have time to restart. If you're deploying AI and board is down, breathing down your neck, then you better do it right from the get-go, because in AI world, 6 months is like an eon. You will have missed the train. So when you do the POVs and try to build the stuff, do the work up front, build it at scale, really test it out, and find the right partner.
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe in this last segment, would love to hear the advice you would have to, I'm going to give you a few different personas, the advice you may have to a board member who is concerned about, is this company that I'm providing governance over, is this company using AI, using the technology? So you have that, that kind of persona, the board member persona. You're with a CEO persona who's like, am I doing this fast enough? What's my ROI? How do I communicate this to the street? And then maybe the CISO, and I'm going to lump the CISO in one persona, and also the CTO or the CDO, or someone who's like, whether I just got hired or I've been, my new mandate is to drive this transformation as fast as possible and change the trajectory of 30,000 person company. Maybe we can walk through a number of those personas. What is the kind of guidance, advice, and coaching to the different personas? Because they're obviously looking at something. They have a different perspective. Their wants and desires maybe sometimes in conflict with others. But I'd love to hear how you kind of walk through those conversations.
Yeah, we don't talk to a lot of board people other than our own board, but we get told about what the board is asking of the business. That's kind of why a lot of our prospects are coming to us. And I think the board members, what we hear about board is that board is demanding rapid adoption, because the board, kind of like the CEO, typically on the board, right? Slightly different priorities, but they're still kind of like similar persona, is all about, we've got to innovate, we got to differentiate, we got to grow the business. AI is clearly the pattern, right? The boards are much more involved in adopting AI than they were in cloud transformation.
Big time.
Yeah. The cloud transformation came from the business. This is coming from the board down. And so, my advice to the board members would be to essentially understand the applicability of current AI systems on productivity, right? That's typically kind of what the two things, it's productivity, and the second one is how do you build features for your customer to deliver better service to your customer. And I think the impetus here is to essentially drive, seek KPIs from the business on how they're delivering value, not how much they're adopting, how many tokens they're using. That's not the right thing to focus on. It's how are you delivering value? Are you shipping code faster? Are you spending less time in meetings? Are you delivering capabilities that your customer's experience is improving? Like, all of these things can be measured and can be attributed to the adoption of new tools and technologies. CEOs, I think the same. Like, they're sitting up there reporting to the board. I think the answer is the same. I actually talk to the CEOs. Even of large companies, believe it or not. Like, it didn't used to be the case back when I was at Sumo, because we were down lower in the organization. Mm-hmm. Now I actually get to talk to the CEOs of large companies, because they want to know, how can we unlock the adoption? How can we move them at speed? What fundamentally needs to be solved? Because they don't often know what is the barrier. What is the sort of the issue? They know that the governance is the primary barrier, but what is causing the governance to be the break, right? And so for them, I would always tell them, what's your data strategy? Not what's your AI strategy. What is your data strategy? Do you have control of your data? And are you using the right technologies to basically maximize the value of your data? And that's through AI, BI, whatever. So those are that's how I have the conversations right now with the CEOs. That's typically where we end up. We don't end up talking about AI. We talk about data and their business priorities. And then, going down to CISO maybe and CTO. With the CISOs, when we talked to the CISOs today, CISOs are really interesting. We actually did a survey to kind of try to understand whether the CISO's role is changing. And we found that like some 60+% of CISOs are starting to own AI governance. And what we find when we speak with CISOs is they're at the mercy of the CTO. Because when you think about now, AI is getting deployed. Who's deploying it? It's engineering is deploying it. agents are running in production applications, they're running in software development organizations. To govern those agents, you need to govern them near where they run, which means that any software like ours, the CISO has to invoke the CTO for deployment, for all those things. So right now, I think the advice to the CTOs, to CISOs is hire an AI engineer on your staff, use AI yourself. Number two, partner with your business. More so than ever before, the silos have to be broken. We actually have a lot of CISOs that we work with who work for the CTO. That sort of merger is happening and fits in some organizations because this is a shared responsibility. CTOs will drive the implementation and adoption. CISOs have to drive the governance, and ultimately it all rests on data, and CISO doesn't own the data. So there is no way of doing this without essentially joint partnership between those two organizations. And that could be CDO, CAIO, CTO, whatnot, right? And the same thing on those sort of technology organization side. We speak with a lot of them. For us, it's a multi-stakeholder sale. We have to get close to everybody. We have to win the hearts of both sides. And for the CTO and CDO, it's that they need to embrace the governance. Right? They oftentimes those technologists weren't thinking just about business outcomes and rapid deployment, but without the governance and owning the governance, it won't happen for them. They'll basically, somebody will slam on the brakes, the bad brakes, not the good brakes, when something happens, and they will actually not be able to deliver. So I think that the collaboration between those two sides of the house has to be deeper than ever.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, and this is back to that, lately for me, it's just been developing empathy, because you're not going to collaborate unless you understand the other perspectives. And, I was always amazed, and there's still a number of conversations that I personally have where the security team is like, they just need to secure, like, we just need to protect, we need to protect this AI stuff. But when we dig into like, okay, what are the other teams are doing? Like, what are the engineering teams are doing? There's not even like really sharp understanding. So they're like, I know there's AI going on in my company. I know I need to protect it. But like, there's a barrier between what the engineering team is actually doing and their knowledge, because they're very, very knowledgeable in certain areas, but they definitely are not knowledgeable in a bunch of these other areas, because that's not what they're getting paid to do. And I think this idea of like, you're right, like there's more collaboration both at the executive level, but also at these working teams level. There's got to be that understanding of, I understand the pressure you have to release software and make this AI stuff work, but also I understand the pressure of, we got to do it in a protected way. And I'm still amazed that we're not quite there yet, as these teams are firing. And sometimes it's a tempo, sometimes it's a little bit of the risk taking. One has a lot higher risk taking appetite, which goes back to the board and the CEO conversation is, are we being clear with the organization about what is the level of risk we're willing to take? Because yes, with speed, back to yes, you the brakes, right? But also when you're hammering when you're putting the pedal to the metal, you're also taking on a certain amount of risk versus going 45 miles an hour. So is there an understanding of, this is the risk we're willing to take, and that means I need everybody to operate at, we're going up to 65 miles an hour. I don't know, again, how you see this conversation playing out.
Risk comes both ways. Either you step on the gas or you slam on the brake. Slam on the brake, the risks, it's a business risk, it's an innovation risk.
Existential risk.
Exactly. So you have to figure out what's the level of risk that you need to take. And I think that's a productive conversation. I'm not sure that it's happening, in the most effective way yet, because AI is still being understood, like you said earlier. But going back to some evidence from what we're seeing in our customer base, about 50% of the time after we complete a POV, typically with a security team, because governance, security, and AI governance still sits there. Typical process, right? You engage, you find a problem, you define a POV, you run a POV, and then you move into commercials. What's happening now is like, we do all this with organizations that are not well integrated. You finish the POV, and now we got to talk to the data team. So that collaboration is forced. When whoever runs the initiative is going to have to eventually have to drag in the other side, because they co-own this problem. And so what we're finding is that, okay, we gotta front load this. We gotta engage these teams up front, because we know whether the security team knows it, wants to admit it or not, they're gonna have to. And so that's a fascinating development. And the second part that's really interesting is we are working with some really siloed organizations still, where there is a political resistance of integrating, where the budget is supplied by the data teams for the governments to be implemented by the security team. They're not even actually having to draw on their own budget to do this. Other people are in such desperate need to move that they're facilitating budgets for the cyber team, and the cyber teams are still resistant of involving and selecting the right technologies for global, right? There is a tremendous amount of change management and reshuffling of the pins in the enterprise that are going to have to happen to grease the skids for productive AI in the enterprise. I think there's shakeups are going to happen in companies. People are going to end up leaving and being squeezed out who don't collaborate. I think it's a really hard problem for some companies to solve, but it's going to have to happen.
Yeah, and it goes back to, I think I'm definitely biased in my own both research and my just education. Ultimately, so much of this is it's a leadership problem. Like, it could be masked as we need this tool, we need to do this solution, we need to do that. Ultimately, it's a leadership kind of a culture thing. How do we work together? Off camera, we were talking before we started taping about, my role at Evotech and what it was my role like a chief AI officer at Evotech versus my role as a CTO in a corporation. And I think one of the things, I had influence over my organization because I managed the team. So probably the first things I did in my last gig was bringing together the product team, the designers, the engineers, infrastructure and security. I kind of clumped, infrastructure and security teams, and actually we had an offsite together, on site. But it was like, get all the liars in one room, right? Get everybody who's like we're failing because of this and because of that team, because of that. Get everybody in the room, and it's really hard as as an advisor now. This is what's needed, right? So you piqued my interest when you said you've seen this pattern and what you need to do to be successful. Not just about our sales process, which is great too, but what we need to do is we have to all be in the room together looking at the same thing as soon as possible. How often did they listen to you when you suggest those things?
It's a mixed bag. And it's also hard to know what are they actually doing after they listen to us, right? Because we don't get to see what happens behind the wall.
Yeah.
But with the right engagement, I really do see, even in these companies that are struggling, individuals are doing the right thing. What I do see often now is AI steering committees that are cross-functional, that involve security, governance, CTO, data organizations, and a lot of conversations that happen at that level influence how it's your style, right? You get them all in the room and they have to work it out. And so we are seeing a lot more of those happening, and we advise that, right? We actually run that way ourselves. We've got we do two things as a company. We build things and we sell things. And there's no functional, divisions. We are engineers and we are, sales, whatnot. We've eliminated all of those barriers inside at Bedrock. And I think a lot of companies are now starting to, in the technology organization, CIO, CTO, CISO, are starting to blur those lines. And I think these AI steering committees are actually helping that because they involve people from all of those functions.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bruno, it was a lovely time with you today. Thank you. And I'm inspired and excited because I was a customer, and then we got to know you and got to know the team at Sumo, and looking forward to doing the same with Bedrock as well. And I appreciated both the wisdom, the advice, and one of the reasons why I enjoy these conversations so much, and our audience enjoys, is that we need to hear more from folks who have seen the waves and the transitions, because some things, similar patterns, and some things are kind of new, and I think you're helping us explore there's new stuff here, and there's new ways of thinking, and also just how do we adapt to this new technology and kind of this next wave of transformation. So I was delighted to have you, and thank you so much for spending this time. And I know you're down in San Diego today. And good luck on the other presentations, other things you have here.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time. It was great to reconnect. And I always learn from these conversations, so I appreciate that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thanks everybody. And we'll be back next week with the next episode of Inflection Point, the Digital Intelligence Podcast. Cheers.